Libra, welcome back. It's always good to have you here. I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. As always, this is a general reading, so take what feels right and leave what doesn't. Okay, Libra, I have to be honest. The moment I started pulling cards for you, I got curious. Because this doesn't feel like someone who is confused anymore. It feels more like someone who has finally stopped running circles around their own feelings. And the funny thing is, the second they start accepting what their heart already knows, a lot of people around them may have opinions about it. So grab a cozy seat, take a comfortable breath, and let's see what the cards are trying to reveal. Okay, the first thing I notice is how calm this energy feels. Not easy, not simple, but calm. Almost like someone who has been arguing with themselves for a very long time is finally getting tired of the argument. You know that feeling when you've replayed the same question so many times that eventually there is nothing left to analyze? That's what this feels like. 'Cause sitting right here is the Lovers. And honestly, this doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel impulsive. It doesn't even feel dramatic yet. It feels like someone quietly arriving at a truth they have been avoiding. For some of you, this person spent a long time trying to convince themselves that what they felt wasn't that important. Maybe life was complicated. Maybe timing felt inconvenient. Maybe there were other priorities demanding attention. But feelings have a strange way of waiting patiently in the background. And eventually, they ask to be acknowledged. The energy around this person feels different now. Less resistance, less confusion, less running. Almost as if they're looking at the connection through completely different eyes. And what surprises me is that this isn't only about attraction. Because honestly, Libra, attraction comes and goes. People feel attracted every day. But that's not what I'm seeing here. This feels like someone recognizing your value, recognizing your presence, recognizing the way you made them feel safe enough to be themselves. And that's harder to replace than most people realize. Okay, as I pull another card, the Two of Cups lands beside the Lovers. And suddenly the atmosphere changes. It becomes softer, warmer, more personal. Because this person isn't only thinking about what they feel. They're starting to think about what the connection itself means. They're remembering conversations, moments, shared experiences. The little things that seemed ordinary at the time. And somehow those memories feel bigger now. You know how sometimes distance gives perspective? Sometimes people only understand the importance of something after stepping away from it. That's the feeling I'm getting. This person may have met many people, spoken to many people, spent time with many different energies, but something keeps bringing their attention back here, back to you, back to this connection, back to something that never fully left their mind. And Libra, I don't think that's happening by accident, because what keeps standing out is comparison. Not in a cruel way, not in a judgmental way, just observation. It's almost like they're looking at their experiences and realizing that nobody quite carries the same energy you do. Nobody quite creates the same emotional atmosphere. Nobody quite leaves the same impression. And that realization appears to be changing something inside them. Honestly, I think that's where the real shift begins. Because once somebody recognizes your value, they can't unknow it. They can ignore it. They can delay it. They can try to distract themselves from it. But they can't pretend they never saw it. And that's where this Justice card becomes interesting. Because the energy around Justice feels incredibly reflective. I keep seeing somebody sitting alone with their thoughts, reviewing old decisions, reviewing old reactions, reviewing moments where they could have chosen differently. Not from a place of guilt, more from a place of understanding. It's like they're beginning to see the bigger picture. They're realizing certain assumptions weren't completely accurate. Certain fears may have been louder than reality. And certain choices created distance that maybe didn't need to exist. So while this person is thinking about you, they're also thinking about themselves, about who they were, about who they're becoming, about what matters now. And that process feels important because it doesn't feel surface level. It feels deeper than that. Okay, the card that catches my attention next is the Four of Wands. And this is where things become really interesting. Because suddenly I'm seeing imagination, future thinking, possibilities, not plans written in stone. Just moments where their mind naturally wanders toward images of togetherness, images of shared experiences, images of what life might feel like with you included in it. Maybe they catch themselves thinking about future conversations, future memories, future milestones, and maybe those thoughts surprise them. Because for a long time, this person may have focused on avoiding difficult feelings. Now it feels like they're becoming curious about where those feelings could lead. And honestly, Libra, that's a very different energy. Because curiosity opens doors that fear keeps closed. So as I sit with these cards, what stands out most isn't urgency. It isn't pressure. It isn't someone forcing an outcome. It's someone slowly realizing that what they were searching for may have been standing in front of them longer than they understood. And the more they sit with that realization, the harder it becomes to look away. And honestly, Libra, that realization seems to be creating a different kind of tension inside this person. Not the kind of tension that pushes someone away. The kind that keeps pulling their attention back no matter how busy they try to be. Because the Page of Swords is sitting here, and the energy around it feels incredibly curious, almost restless. I keep seeing somebody checking something without really meaning to. Maybe they open a social media app. Maybe they tell themselves they're only going to take a quick look. Maybe they aren't even searching for anything specific. And somehow they still end up wondering what you're doing, how you're feeling, who you've been spending your time with, whether you're happy, whether you've moved on from certain things, whether your life looks different now. And the funny thing is, I don't think they're gathering information because they're being calculating. It feels much more personal than that. It feels like somebody trying to understand where they stand without asking the question directly. Because asking would require vulnerability. And vulnerability still seems to make this person nervous. Okay, the Four of Pentacles immediately catches my eye beside it. And there is something almost protective about this energy. It's like this person keeps reaching for their feelings and pulling their hand back at the last second. They want to know more. They want to get closer. They want reassurance. But at the same time, they don't want to expose too much of what is happening inside them. So there's this strange dance taking place. One step forward, one step back, one moment of confidence, one moment of hesitation. And I think part of that hesitation comes from a question they can't seem to answer. What if they misunderstood everything? What if the connection meant more to them than it meant to you? What if they finally gathered the courage to speak honestly and discovered that too much time had passed? You know, sometimes people aren't afraid of their feelings. They're afraid of what those feelings might reveal. And that's the atmosphere I'm sitting in right now. This person seems deeply aware that caring about someone creates risk. The more valuable someone becomes, the more there is to lose. And I don't think they expected you to become this important. Honestly, I don't think they saw it coming. Because the more I sit with this energy, the more I feel like this connection grew quietly, almost in the background, without announcements, without dramatic declarations, without anyone realizing how significant it was becoming. Until one day they looked around and noticed your absence felt louder than they expected. Okay, the moon is appearing here, and everything suddenly feels softer, quieter, more private. This feels like the version of someone nobody else gets to see. The version that appears late at night when distractions disappear. The version that sits alone with thoughts they don't usually share. And Libra, I keep feeling like your name has been visiting this person's mind during those moments. Not necessarily in a dramatic way. More in those unexpected flashes. A memory appearing out of nowhere. A conversation replaying itself. A random reminder that instantly changes their mood. It's almost like certain parts of life have become connected to thoughts of you. A song, a place, a phrase, a familiar routine. And every time it happens, they pause for a second longer than they used to. Because there is something about you they still haven't fully figured out. Something that continues to intrigue them. Something that refuses to become ordinary. And honestly, I think that mystery is part of the attraction. Not because you're hiding anything. Not because you're playing games. But because they keep discovering new layers every time they think they've reached the end of the story. The more they observe, the more questions they have. The more questions they have, the more attention they give. And the more attention they give, the harder it becomes to convince themselves that this connection isn't important. Okay, the Knight of Pentacles is arriving now, and I have to smile a little. Because this energy isn't rushing anywhere. Not at all. This feels like someone standing at the edge of a bridge, looking across, thinking carefully before taking the first step. There is movement here. But it is thoughtful movement, measured movement. The kind that happens after a lot of reflection. After a lot of observation, after somebody spends enough time learning what their heart is actually trying to say. And I feel like that's exactly where this person is. They're learning, not about you, about themselves, about why they reacted the way they did, about why certain fears felt so convincing, about why they kept holding back when part of them wanted to move closer. And the more answers they find, the more stable this energy becomes. Less chaotic, less uncertain, less scattered. It's almost like pieces that never quite fit together before are slowly beginning to make sense. Not all at once, not overnight, just gradually, quietly. Like sunlight entering a room one corner at a time. And Libra, I keep feeling that while this person watches from a distance, something else is happening too. They're noticing your strength. They're noticing the way you carry yourself, the way you continue living your life, the way you seem less focused on proving your worth and more focused on simply being yourself. And that appears to affect them more than they expected. Because there is a difference between admiring someone from afar and realizing that person may have become genuinely important. The Page of Swords keeps looking. The Four of Pentacles keeps holding everything close. The Moon keeps pulling hidden feelings to the surface. And the Knight of Pentacles keeps standing there, quietly considering what happens when observation is no longer enough. Something about this energy feels heavier than before, not in a bad way, just deeper. Like somebody has finally stopped distracting themselves long enough to hear their own thoughts clearly. And honestly, Libra, those thoughts don't seem very comfortable right now, because Temperance is sitting here and the atmosphere around it feels incredibly reflective. I keep seeing someone revisiting old memories with completely different eyes. Not because the memories changed, because they changed. And that shift can be surprisingly emotional. You know, sometimes people spend so much time focusing on what happened to them that they never stop to examine how they contributed to the story. But this person appears to be entering that space, that quiet place where excuses start losing their power, where defensiveness begins to soften, where understanding slowly takes its place. And as I sit with this energy, I don't feel self-pity. I don't feel someone trying to make themselves the victim. I feel somebody becoming honest. Maybe for the first time in a very long time. Because the Five of Swords is appearing beside Temperance, and immediately, I get this image of someone replaying certain conversations in their mind. Certain arguments. Certain moments where pride spoke louder than vulnerability. Certain situations where fear disguised itself as confidence. And the more they revisit those memories, the harder it becomes to avoid one uncomfortable truth. There were moments when they could have handled things differently. Moments when they could have listened more. Moments when they could have stayed instead of withdrawing. Moments when they could have spoken honestly instead of protecting themselves behind silence. And Libra, I don't think this realization arrived all at once. It feels gradual, almost like watching fog disappear from a landscape. At first, only a few details become visible, then more, until eventually the entire picture stands in front of you. And there is a way to pretend it isn't there, honestly. That can be a difficult experience, especially for someone who spent a long time believing they were justified in every decision they made. Because what I'm feeling from this person is not shame. It's awareness. Awareness has a very different texture. Awareness says, I understand something today that I couldn't understand before. And that understanding appears to be changing the way they see this connection. Okay, the Judgment card is coming through strongly here. And I have to tell you, this feels incredibly personal, not dramatic, not loud, personal, like an internal awakening nobody else can see. The kind that happens while driving alone. The kind that appears in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. The kind that suddenly arrives when nobody is expecting it. A realization, a memory, a feeling, something clicks. And after that moment, things don't look quite the same anymore. This person may have spent a lot of time trying to move forward while carrying unfinished emotions. Trying to convince themselves that what happened belonged entirely in the past. Trying to close a chapter that never actually felt complete. But the energy around Judgment feels like the chapter quietly reopening itself. Not because it wants more pain, because it wants honesty. And honesty can be incredibly healing when someone is finally ready for it. I keep hearing the phrase, I wish I had understood this sooner. Not in a desperate way, not in a hopeless way. Just a sincere recognition that perspective sometimes arrives later than we would like. And when it does, it changes everything. Because once this person begins seeing the connection through that lens, certain memories become impossible to ignore. The Six of Cups is arriving here with such tenderness, such warmth, such softness, and suddenly, all the tension fades for a moment. Because beneath all the confusion, all the overthinking, all the hesitation, there seems to be affection, real affection. The kind that survives distance, the kind that survives silence, the kind that quietly waits in the background even when life becomes complicated. I keep feeling this person remembering who you were during moments when nobody was watching. Not the public version, not the polished version, the real version, the conversations, the kindness, the comfort, the way you made certain situations feel easier, the way your presence created calm, the way you understood things without needing long explanations, and honestly, those are often the memories people miss the most. Not the grand gestures. The simple moments, the ordinary moments, the moments that felt safe. Because safety becomes incredibly valuable once it's gone. And Libra, there is something else happening here. The more this person reflects, the less interested they seem in protecting their ego. That's important because ego often wants to win. This energy wants to heal. And those are very different motivations. I feel like this person is becoming increasingly aware that some wounds cannot be resolved through silence. Some misunderstandings cannot be fixed by waiting. Some feelings cannot be hidden forever. There's a growing desire to make peace with the past. Not erase it, not rewrite it, just acknowledge it honestly. And for some of you, that energy may eventually find its way into words. Maybe through a conversation, maybe through a message, maybe through an apology that has been forming quietly for longer than anyone realizes. Because sitting here with Temperance, 5 of Swords, Judgment, and 6 of Cups, what I keep sensing is someone standing face to face with their own heart. And the more truthful they become with themselves, the harder it becomes to stay silent about what they genuinely feel. A different layer of the story begins to reveal itself here, because the energy no longer feels focused only on what this person is discovering inside themselves. It feels like they're becoming aware of the world around them. And honestly, that awareness appears to be creating some pressure. The 5 of Wands is the first card pulling my attention, not because I see a huge conflict, not because I see chaos. What I see is noise, opinions, expectations, people having something to say about choices that don't actually belong to them. And Libra, I keep getting this feeling that part of this person's hesitation wasn't only about the connection. It was also about how certain people around them might react. Maybe friends had opinions, maybe family had expectations. Maybe there were people who assumed they already knew what direction this person's life should take. You know how sometimes everyone becomes comfortable with a version of you? A version that fits neatly into their expectations. A version that never surprises them. A version that keeps making the same decisions. What happens when somebody suddenly changes? What happens when somebody decides they want something different? That's where this energy feels very alive. Because I don't think everyone expected this person to look back toward you. I don't think everyone expected them to start questioning old narratives. And I definitely don't think everyone expected them to begin considering a completely different path. The 5 of Wands feels less like open confrontation and more like competing voices. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has advice. Everyone thinks they know what's best, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise, this person is trying to hear their own heart. Okay, the 7 of Swords appears beside it, and the atmosphere becomes much more private, much more guarded. I keep seeing somebody choosing silence rather than explanation. Not because they're being dishonest, because they're tired. Tired of defending their feelings. Tired of justifying every decision. Tired of feeling like they need permission to want what they want. And honestly, I think that's creating a lot of internal tension, because part of them wants to speak openly. Part of them wants to say exactly what's been happening inside. But another part still wonders whether everyone else will understand. And maybe that's the realization they're slowly arriving at. Not everyone has to understand. Not everyone has to approve. Not everyone has to agree. Some decisions become clearer the moment a person stops looking for outside validation. I keep hearing this quiet sentence. I can't keep living my life according to someone else's expectations. And Libra, that sentence feels important, because it feels like something this person may have needed to learn for a very long time. The energy feels mature, not rebellious, not reckless, just mature. Like somebody finally recognizing that peace does not come from making everybody happy. Peace comes from being honest with yourself. Okay, the Queen of Swords is entering the reading, and immediately everything feels sharper, clearer, more decisive. This card doesn't feel emotional at all. It feels like clarity arriving after a very long period of confusion. And I have to tell you, the energy here is powerful, because this person seems to be reaching a point where they can finally separate other people's opinions from their own. Truth. That isn't always easy, especially for someone who has spent years worrying about disappointing people, especially for someone who naturally tries to keep the peace. But the Queen of Swords feels like a turning point, a moment when somebody looks at their life and asks, what do I actually want? Not what everyone else wants, not what looks good from the outside, not what avoids criticism, what feels real, what feels meaningful, what feels worth pursuing. And once that question is asked honestly, certain answers become difficult to ignore. I almost feel like this person is beginning to see which connections nourish them and which connections simply drain them. Which conversations leave them feeling understood? Which conversations leave them feeling smaller? Which relationships encourage growth? Which relationships survive only because they've existed for a long time? And those realizations appear to be changing their priorities. Honestly, some people around them may notice the shift before they even say anything, because energy changes before behavior changes, and this person's energy feels different. more intentional, more self-aware, less willing to settle. The Nine of Wands arrives here with a very specific feeling: exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying responsibilities that no longer belong to you. The kind that comes from trying to satisfy everybody at the same time. The kind that comes from constantly second-guessing yourself. I keep seeing someone standing at the edge of a major personal realization. They've spent so much energy trying to avoid conflict that they accidentally created conflict inside themselves. And eventually, that becomes impossible to sustain. Because no matter how hard someone tries, they cannot permanently silence their own truth. The heart always finds a way to speak, sometimes quietly, sometimes gradually, sometimes through countless sleepless nights and difficult reflections. But eventually it speaks. And I feel like that's exactly what is happening here. This person is becoming less afraid of disappointing others and more afraid of abandoning themselves. That is a very different kind of motivation. And Libra, as these cards sit together, something feels increasingly obvious. The people who truly care about this person's happiness may not need explanations at all. The people who only care about maintaining control may be the ones who struggle most with the changes taking place. And that realization seems to be helping this person understand something important. A life built around pleasing everyone else can become a prison. A life built around honesty may not satisfy everyone, but it allows a person to breathe. And the more this person reconnects with that feeling, the less willing they seem to be to walk away from what their heart keeps leading them toward. What feels different here is the sense of calm that begins to settle over the reading. Not because all the questions have been answered, not because every obstacle has disappeared, but because the energy no longer feels uncertain, it feels intentional. And honestly, Libra, that's a beautiful shift. Because for a long time, this story seemed to revolve around discovery. Discovery of feelings. Discovery of truth. Discovery of what mattered. What I'm seeing here feels less like discovery and more like decision. The Ace of Cups arrives first, and immediately the atmosphere softens. There is something incredibly sincere about this energy. Not flashy, not performative, not driven by excitement alone. This feels like somebody whose heart has become quieter and clearer at the same time. I keep sensing an emotional maturity that wasn't fully present before. A willingness to stop treating feelings as a problem to solve and start treating them as something worth honoring. You know, there comes a point when a person realizes that some connections continue to matter no matter how much time passes, no matter how many distractions appear, no matter how many attempts are made to move in a different direction. And when that realization settles in, something changes. The constant questioning begins to fade. The endless analysis begins to lose its grip. And what remains is a simple understanding. I care about this. I care about this person. I want to see where this could go. And honestly, sometimes that understanding is far more powerful than any dramatic declaration, because it comes from experience. It comes from reflection. It comes from knowing exactly what life feels like without that connection present. The energy around the Ace of Cups feels very genuine, very open-hearted, as though this person is no longer trying to negotiate with their feelings. They're simply allowing themselves to feel them. Okay, the Ten of Pentacles is sitting here, and this card keeps pulling my attention toward the future, not in a fantasy-driven way, not in a daydreaming way. This feels practical, grounded, realistic. I keep seeing someone imagining ordinary moments rather than extraordinary ones, sharing meals, building routines, being present during important chapters of life, growing older alongside someone they genuinely value. And that detail feels important, because infatuation tends to focus on excitement. This energy feels focused on consistency, the kind of connection that still matters on quiet mornings, the kind of connection that still matters during difficult seasons, the kind of connection that survives long after the initial spark evolves into something deeper. And Libra, I think that's part of what surprises this person, because they may have expected feelings to fade. They may have expected distance to change things. They may have expected life to redirect their attention elsewhere. Yet here they are, still thinking about the future, still imagining possibilities, still wondering what life would look like if they stopped resisting what their heart keeps returning to. The Ten of Pentacles doesn't feel rushed at all. It feels like somebody taking the idea of commitment seriously. Not because they feel pressured, because they genuinely want to. Okay, the Ten of Cups arrives and suddenly the energy becomes warmer, softer, almost peaceful. I keep feeling that this person is beginning to understand something about happiness. Not the version people perform for the outside world. Not the version built around appearances. The real version. The private version. The one that exists behind closed doors. And what strikes me is how simple it feels. I don't see them craving constant excitement. I don't see them chasing endless novelty. I see someone longing for emotional safety, comfort, connection, the ability to share life with somebody who feels like home. Honestly, that word keeps coming through. Home, not a place, a feeling. And I think there is something about your energy that creates that feeling inside this person. Maybe they didn't recognize it immediately. Maybe they only understood it after spending time apart from it. But the realization appears to be growing stronger. Because when I look at these cards together, I don't see somebody searching endlessly for the next thing. I see somebody appreciating what already holds meaning. Somebody recognizing value that cannot easily be replaced. The Empress enters the reading, and everything becomes incredibly beautiful here. Not because of physical attraction alone. Although there is certainly admiration, what I feel is appreciation, deep appreciation. The kind that develops over time. The kind that grows stronger the more someone learns about another person's heart. This person seems to admire the way you've continued growing, the way you've continued becoming yourself, the way you've carried your experiences without allowing them to harden you. And honestly, that appears to leave a lasting impression. Because strength can be attractive, kindness can be attractive, authenticity can be attractive. But when those qualities exist together, they create something difficult to forget. I keep feeling that this person sees you as someone worth investing in emotionally, someone worth building with, someone worth showing up for. And that perspective feels very different from where this reading began. Not because their feelings have suddenly appeared, because their understanding of those feelings has evolved. The Empress feels like a reminder that meaningful connections often grow slowly. They deepen gradually, layer by layer, season by season. And that is exactly what this energy feels like. A connection becoming more substantial, more grounded, more intentional, less focused on uncertainty, more focused on possibility. The Ace of Cups continues flowing through the reading. The Ten of Pentacles keeps looking toward a shared future. The Ten of Cups keeps creating images of emotional fulfillment. And the Empress keeps reminding this person of the value they see when they look in your direction. What stands out most isn't urgency, it's sincerity. The feeling that somebody is no longer asking whether this connection matters. They're beginning to ask what becomes possible when they finally allow themselves to take it seriously. All right, Libra, I'm going to leave the cards here. Something tells me this story is still unfolding in ways that haven't fully revealed themselves yet. So for now, give yourself permission to trust your own journey, focus on your own peace, and let life show you what needs to be seen in its own time. Thank you for being here and sharing this space with me. Your support truly means more than you know. I hope you leave this reading feeling a little lighter, a little clearer, and a little more connected to yourself. Take care of your beautiful heart, Libra, and I'll see you in the next reading. Much love.